So, to my lasting dismay, several people have asked me to address this issue with NFL players taking a knee during the national anthem. And honestly, it's something that I didn't really want to talk about. Because not only do I not give a fuck about football, but this is just another example of one of those issues where I see faults on both sides, and where the entire shit show breaks my morale and my inspiration to keep making videos in the first place. Every time this happens, it becomes painfully clear to me just how little impact I really have, and just how many people out there on both sides of the fence have forgone actual discussion in favor of regressing to the state of chimps flinging handfuls of crap at each other. The only real difference being that we use memes now instead of actual feces. And once again, I just know that no matter what I say here, it's going to result in more pointless bickering and a loss of subscribers for going through the trouble of responding at all. But I did not start a channel because I wish to remain silent. For better or worse, I'm going to give my opinion on the matter, and I'm going to address it in 3 stages: the shit-slinging liberals, the shit-slinging conservatives, and the narcissistic NFL players who don't actually give a shit. From the storm of memes on my Facebook feed over the past few days, the liberal stance on this issue seems to be summed up in this image, and it demonstrates that these people are not interested in discussion, and that the words they say are meant only for the ears of their left-wing circle jerk, because it does not address the actual objections to their ideology. I've said it several times before on this channel, and I imagine I'll have to say it many more times in the future. My videos are not for those to whom I am responding, nor are they for those who already agree with me. They are to inform the fence-sitters who might be swayed one way or the other, so that they might make an informed decision. With that said, SJWs, the people you need to be addressing are the ones who disagree with your premise, not those who take issue with your method of protest, because that's the only way this argument is ever going to be settled. However, when Antifa show up anywhere with the intent of punching Nazis, we absolutely do take issue with how you choose to protest before we take issue with what you're saying. Because by being the first to resort to violence, you have already lowered the standard of discourse to those terms, and it's only a matter of time before that violence is reciprocated. And none of us are prepared to find ourselves in a situation that will cost lives over inane, trivial bullshit. Now that an increasing number of NFL players who are trying to give the impression that they represent your agenda have decided to choose a non-violent means of protest, most of us who take the time to respond in detail do not take issue with their method. We take issue with why they are doing it in the first place.
We still have no clue of what being born white means. And if you read some of the recent literature, you'll realize it really is no such thing as whiteness. But we've kind of made it up. That's not my original thought, but it's true. And it's hard to sit down and decide that, yes, it's like you're at the 50 meter mark in a 100-meter dash. And you got that kind of a lead, yes, because you were born white.
That was Greg Popovich, current coach of the San Antonio Spurs, and my personal reason for expecting the NBA to start following the NFL's example in some form or another in the near future. And he, much like you, is talking out of his ass. Especially for being a 68-year-old man who was actually alive prior to the end of Jim Crow laws in this country, and who actually saw what our culture looked like when the government really did endorse racism and separatism. And even then, he was there to see white people marching right beside black people for the sake of equality. Just like every other social justice warrior who subscribes to this bullshit, he can't give a single example of any legal advantage white people are given in this country at the expense of any minority group. The garbage coming out of his mouth is the premise with which we disagree, SJWs. This is what those of us taking the time to respond to you actually care about. It's the part you have no answers for, and so you choose not to address those objections. What you actually take issue with is prejudice and racial bias, and even then, only the prejudice and racial bias from white people in favor of other white people. Unfortunately, the only policies that can be enforced in any official capacity in this country are those codified into law. And so far, it seems that the media you have infected only care to criticize the enforcement of those laws concerning whites who discriminate against non-whites, because thanks to you, that is the only type of prejudice which is demonized by default. Both the government and the media are conforming more and more to the social paradigm you call for every single day. We've seen no objection from you concerning Sally Brown's expressed intent to silence white people in the DNC forum. We've seen no move to repeal affirmative action during its 57 years of implementation, even though it is a deliberate and unconstitutional form of discrimination against white people. We've seen no legal intervention in keeping college campuses from excluding white people from their safe spaces. And we've seen absolutely no outrage from you when rioters were beating the shit out of white people in Milwaukee simply for being white. Police brutality is not a racial issue. It happens to white people as well, and the fact that you only protest it when it happens to someone who isn't white speaks into your own bigotry. Even if you were right about police targeting black people, the fact that you fail to address the substantially higher violent crime rate among the black community, let alone the much higher rate of blacks murdering whites compared to the reverse, also speaks to your bigotry. The officially sanctioned actions of police are not based on race, and legally they are not permitted to be, but your actions most certainly are. You are the real racists in this debate, and your divisive rhetoric does not deserve the support of anyone to whom truth actually matters. However, the opinion of the people slinging shit from the right of my Facebook feed seems to be summed up in this image. Once again, this is to demonstrate the fact that you are not actually listening to the grievances of the other side, whether they are valid or not. This is the stuff of echo chambers. Your insistence on focusing on sentiments of patriotism and the heroism of our soldiers is a gross misplacement of priorities at the very least. If you care more about the fact that they refuse to stand for the anthem than you do about the fact that they're kneeling in protest of white privilege, you need to reassess what actually matters in this discussion. While I think to say that Kaepernick or his copycats planned for this outcome is to give them far more intellectual credit than they deserve, I must admit that them choosing to protest specifically in this way was ultimately a brilliant move. And the reason is because the resounding "they hate America" booming from the right is doing far more to help them than to hurt them. Seriously, that ridiculous sentence is tantamount to "they took our jobs" at this point. Before all of this social justice horseshit started up, I considered myself mostly liberal. And I can tell you right now, "you just hate America, if you don't like America, you can get out," is easily one of the most ridiculed statements in recent history. And you need to understand that to the major players in this debate, those with the most influence, informing people is not a part of their agenda, because it's completely unnecessary and even counterproductive in their attempts to manipulate the collective opinion. If Kaepernick had counted on you responding this way, then protesting by taking a knee during the anthem was a brilliant strategy, because every utterance of "you hate America" is going to ensure that anyone who hears it and even slightly disagrees with you is going to disregard anything else you have to say on the matter. With one small action, he has effectively lured you into compromising your own credibility and containing your own threat to their narrative. You are doing precisely what they want you to do. And that is precisely my problem with Trump. Whether you like it or not, I am fairly certain that most people in this country are not pleased with his presidency. Virtually everyone on the left hates his guts, as seen in the daily vitriol bleeding into social media platforms since his election. And a great deal of those who actually voted for him only did so because they saw him as the lesser of two evils. So when he says stupid shit like,
"Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, 'Get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!'"
It then becomes very easy for the media and any other institution with left-wing influence to deflect, blame everything on him, and further embolden those who already profess to hate him. Especially when they have been convinced since before his election that his presidency would be, and currently is, synonymous with white supremacy. Whether or not I agree with the policies of his administration, he is still a massive fucking liability. As I expected him to be, because we all knew that he enjoys being in the spotlight of a PR shitstorm, as he demonstrated in his eyesore of a feud with Rosie O'Donnell years before he even declared his intent to run for the Oval Office. And not a single one of us who witnessed that cringe fest expected that part of him to change after he won. We expected his presidency to be resented and ridiculed even more than Bush's second term, and he has faithfully delivered. This is what people on the far right need to understand if this discussion is going to be productive. You may see standing for the anthem as a motion of respect for our soldiers, but they do not. And frankly, honestly, neither do I. To me, this degree of patriotism is tantamount to believing that the government and every entity representing it are somehow above criticism, even though the very foundation of our country was supposed to be in holding any form of government authority accountable for preserving the liberties and prioritizing the interests of its people. You do not get to tell these people that the soldiers who died paid for their right to sit during the anthem with their lives, and then shame them for practicing that right. Because if they don't, then what exactly did those soldiers die for? Our current government is host to a number of problems for which they absolutely should be held accountable. And whether or not I agree with the grievances of a given set of protesters, that feedback mechanism still needs to be maintained all the same. But that doesn't mean those of us who aren't particularly patriotic don't respect or care for our soldiers. I, just like many other people, have had quite a few friends and acquaintances in the military. Just like those who are butthurt over disrespect to our flag, I have worried about those people while they were overseas, worried that I may never see them alive again. And I can tell you right now, not every soldier who enters our military does so out of patriotism. The reality is that many people enlist because their lives are falling apart and they see it as their only option for a financially stable future. Because they believe they can get a degree and a well-paying job out of the deal, something with which the Army actually incentivizes enlistment in their advertising campaigns, and they see fighting for their lives in a foreign country as a less stressful alternative to dealing with crippling student debt. The national anthem represents our earliest form of government fighting tyranny and oppression as a faction of rebels, right here on our home soil for our independence as a nation. It represents men who fought not for the promise of money, or because they thought the experience would land them a respectable career, but because it was the only way they could escape the tyranny of the crown. And the only way standing for that song would denote respect for the soldiers of today would be if our soldiers represented us directly in the exact same capacity. But they don't. The military represents our government, and they act only at the behest of our government while operating in lands that are of little or no threat to us. And at this point, I think it's fair to say from either end of the political spectrum that our current government does not represent the people. It simply doesn't. Our government engages in shady deals with giant corporations that don't have our best interest in mind all the fucking time, and we never end up hearing about it until it's too late. And not a single American war over the past 100 years or so was fought with anything close to a consensus of public opinion backing it. The bottom line is that the artifacts of patriotism we observe in common are not protected from the freedoms of speech and peaceful protest, and that's precisely because of the circumstances under which we first earned those freedoms. Because a government that does not represent its people, and especially a government that oppresses its people, should not be permitted to silence those voices of dissent. If these NFL players honestly believed that this is happening, and if the facts and statistics were actually on their side, then I would agree with what they're doing. But the facts aren't on their side, and I don't believe that they actually care one way or the other. At least, not for the reasons they would have us believe. Concerning the NFL players and the media moguls at the heart of this shitstorm, one thing needs to be understood before there is any further discussion. The higher you climb any media empire in this capitalist system of ours, the more you understand that green is the only color that matters. It's the only color that has ever mattered. I say again that I am not a sports fan, and I never have been. I do not know any of these players or coaches for their ethics, nor is my perspective colored one way or the other by any sentiment of fan loyalty. But even at a cursory glance, I see only opportunism at its worst. I see nothing in their demonstration here that does not smack of greed for the almighty dollar, honest opinions be damned. All this amounts to nothing more than a massive publicity stunt, or rather a negotiation tactic as put by Ranting Monkey and Cognitive Thought a couple of days ago. Great video, by the way, guys. And I see no reason to believe otherwise. More to the point, I guarantee that every move made here was done after a careful risk assessment. It's not a matter of what they do or do not supposedly stand for, it's about how many people will sympathize with what they're doing and what they stand to gain because of it. And I guarantee you that in lieu of any progress in his contract negotiations, this protest that Kaepernick started set him up with a convenient contingency plan even in the worst case scenario. Colin Kaepernick's original post-game interview following his first demonstration of sitting for the national anthem was laughable to anyone who has paid any amount of attention to this debate. The link to that video is in the description. Feel free to watch it for yourself. The way he went about it does not portray him as someone with legitimate outrage, nor does it portray him as someone who truly believes he is acting on a moral imperative. And I don't believe for a fucking second that this glassy-eyed, no-neck douchebag with the vocabulary of a common 5th grader has any grasp on the facts or the statistics surrounding any of these issues. As a matter of fact, his responses were apparently coached, if not outright rehearsed. If he really had any personal interest in this debate, if he actually had reason to do what he did beyond the advancement of his own fame and fortune, he would have had specifics for the grievances he held, and supposedly still holds. We'd have seen genuine concern on his face and heard genuine indignation in his voice, but we didn't. It wasn't even until the 6-minute mark in that 18.5 minutes of vague question-dodging nonsense that he even mentioned people of color. His responses were the kind of responses given by a man who told his agent of his plan, and whose agent approved based on the PR opportunities, but advised him to rely only on vague weasel words in interviews in order to make backpedaling as easy as possible and damage control as clean as possible. Without a doubt, he was told to avoid mentioning any specific issues or personal anecdotes, as indicated by the fact that he only hesitantly and begrudgingly divulged the story about his supposed racial profiling experience after having been asked for personal examples of his oppression no fewer than 3 times from at least 2 different press officials. A story for which we will definitely never hear the objective facts to vindicate his baseless assumption. And I promise you, whatever agent was representing him was shaking his head as he mentioned that story in that interview, but already had his next move planned regardless of what official response his actions would receive. I promise you that he already knew the current political environment would give him leverage, especially as a person of color, and that he'd be hailed as a hero for doing what he did regardless of the outcome. Even if the NFL responded by going as far as to terminate his contract, even if no other team was ever interested in signing him again, preserving his wealth and celebrity status would be as simple as making 2 phone calls. One to commission a ghostwriter to tell his story, villainize the NFL, and push the narrative, and another to plug him into the Oprah's Book Club pipeline so he could profit from his victim status. If you don't think he was reassured of these things, then I want you to look at the smug look on his fucking face toward the end when he says, quote, "If anything happens, it'll just prove my point." Does this look like the face of a person who is actually worried for his career and scared for his life to you? Or does it look to you as it looks to me, the face of a man laughing all the way to the bank? And if that isn't enough to convince you, take a look at this sad sap.
I would say that my personal thoughts about the situation is that regardless of this plan, very few players knew that I was going to the tunnel because I only asked the team leadership. And so because of that, I didn't give them an opportunity to stand with me during the national anthem. That is the very embarrassing part on my end and what transpires, because when everybody sees an image of me standing by myself, everybody thinks that the team and the Steelers are not behind me, and that's absolutely wrong.
That was Alejandro Villanueva, an offensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers, apologizing for making the mistake of being the lone member of his team who chose to stand for the anthem. Why? Because along with the rest of the league who are taking the piss out of Donald Trump right now, he also understands that Trump doesn't have the authority to fire him. But the ones who sign his checks most certainly do. And if he refuses to play ball, he knows it could pose a real threat to his career. And he also knows that failing to apologize will subject him to the Twitter hate mob who have destroyed the PR of so many others before him, especially as a white man. And just to nip any pushback to that statement in the bud right now, yes, I am aware that he has a Spanish name. But first of all, keep in mind that Spanish is originally a white language, and that native Spaniards are white. And even if his name comes from a family lineage south of the equator, I honestly don't give a shit. If it weren't for his celebrity status, nobody would know his name, and nobody would think him anything other than white at a glance. I've heard it said that nobody would have called Obama half-black had they caught him stealing their car, and the same goes for this man. Nobody would permit him beyond the door of a college campus safe space unless he claimed to identify as something other than what he appears to be. Further, from what I've been told, Alejandro here served as an Army Ranger in 3 tours to Afghanistan, which was probably why he decided to stand in the first place. Patriotism to him might be a personal thing based on those experiences, just as it may be to many of you who are taking issue with the act of kneeling. And yet, he was willing to throw all of that under the bus due to the encroaching threat to his livelihood coming from the left, not from the right. That's right, a wealthy, straight, apparently white male has been pressured into apologizing for being patriotic, an act that has been expected since the inception of this country, simply at the looming threat of the social justice mob and those who sympathize with them. Yet in everything they are trying to protest, they will still have you believe that he is privileged because of the color of his fucking skin. Get this through your heads. The NFL players pulling this shit do not give a fuck about any of these issues they so vaguely cite. And the same can be said for any political opinion coming from anyone else who stands to gain every time you tune in to that fucking idiot box. Whether it's Colin Kaepernick, CNN, or Fox News opening their mouths, you do well to check the facts for yourself and assume that what they're saying comes with an ulterior motive, because it always does. Nobody earning tens of millions of dollars a year is going to risk their career by running their mouths about race politics that they evidently don't even understand. The only color that matters to them is green. In closing, this entire debacle is a much bigger and much less productive clusterfuck than it should be. I do not find the subject of this controversy nearly as disheartening as the conversation, or lack thereof, surrounding it. And I'm hoping that it will fade into memory sooner rather than later, even though I know it's bound to be replaced by something just as stupid before long. Anyway, thanks as always for your support, guys. As I indicated at the end of my last video, I do intend to take a bit of a break while I familiarize myself with new software and devise a better system of time management. In the meantime, just so my channel doesn't stagnate from lack of activity, and so I can mark my intent on returning as soon as possible, I'll still be hosting narrations of my work from Pleasant Nightmares along with videos from my fellow shitlords out there. So if you're interested in a guest spot, reach out to me via any of my social media or crowdfunding platforms linked in the description. And if anything significant happens between now and then on which you'd like to hear my opinion, be sure to let me know and I'll add it to the list of my things to do upon my return. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what you saw here, have a look at my other videos and leave me your thoughts in the comments. If you support my message, then please like, favorite, and subscribe. If you'd like to help this channel improve, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on Facebook with any suggestions. And if you'd like to support me more directly, please consider following me on Patreon. Links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll catch you all in my next video.